Mr. Chair, we are now live.
Well, good evening and welcome to the Town of Ajax Heritage Advisory Committee meeting for Wednesday, February 2nd, 2022. This meeting is being held electronically and live streamed on the internet. All staff and committee members are participating by phone or video. All regular practices and procedures of the committee continue to apply during this electronic meeting. If we encounter any technical difficulties, we may take a brief recess while they are resolved. Thanks for your patience, and we will now proceed with the meeting. First of all, are there any conflicts of interest from committee members with any items to be discussed this evening? Seeing none, I thank you. Now, if we can look for the adoption of the minutes from the previous meeting dated December 1st, 2021. Do we have a motion to adopt the minutes? Thanks, Steve. Very good.
I'd like to move that the minutes of December 1st, 2021 be accepted into minutes.
And do we have a seconder for that? Thank you, Pam. Okay, now we'll work into presentations and discussion items, and I'll throw it over to Mike now.
All right, thank you. All right, good evening, everyone. So there's 5 items that I'll be discussing tonight. The first of which is a heritage permit for 497 Kingston Road West, which is known as the Field Bertrand House. And as mentioned just before joining the meeting here, it was our expectation that the owners, Leslie and Dino, would be on the call to follow along and answer any questions. If they don't end up joining and there are questions directed to them, I'd be happy to pass those along and follow up soon with some answers. So 497 Kingston Road West is on the south side of Kingston Road, somewhat south of Hewison Court. It is a property that we're probably all familiar with because it stands out. It's a beautiful red brick house in the Italianate architectural style, somewhat set back on a large lot with lots of mature trees. So as I mentioned, this property is known as the Field Bertrand House. The exact date of construction isn't known, but it's reputed to be 1870. Our records go back to show that in 1882, it was purchased by Dr. Byron Field for his daughter. And it's interesting to note that it was one of the earliest heritage designations from the town of Ajax. This property is designated primarily for its architectural value, which is expressed in the designation statement as an excellent example of late Victorian eclectic taste. So the property owners have actually been undergoing a number of repairs and improvements to the property over the last several years. Some of you may remember back to, I think it was 2017, when they did some masonry work at the property that was supported by a grant from the town. Now they're in a place where they wanted to move forward with some further improvements to the property. So they've brought on a heritage architect that's leading the project. And the project can really be broken down into 3 parts. The first of which is replacement of the main entry door system. The second is replacement of all the windows in the original portion of the house, excluding the basement windows. And then the third is replacement of the wooden window sills with new limestone sills. So I'll talk about each of these individual components of the project in a little more detail. When it comes to the door replacement, this one isn't too concerning to me. The door that's there right now is a replacement door itself. It's not the original. So what's intended to happen is to take out the door that exists now and to fit it with a new custom built door, for which you can see the basic design down at the bottom left of the screen. So the new doors will be constructed of solid pine, and they will be made to match the opening dimensions. So no work will be required to the masonry around the door. The new door will fit right in as it is now. So the style of the new door is somewhat basic for the Italianate style, but it does follow a lot of the traditional characteristics that you would see with an Italianate door. Some of those being the inverted cross type design, where you have 4 panels on the door, the 2 small ones at the bottom, and then 2 larger, longer ones at the top. In this case, the top panels will be glazed, and the new transom that will go in will actually take full advantage of the arch at the top of the transom. So right now you see that it's just a rectangular bit of glass there. The new transom will actually extend upwards right to the top of that arch. So just as a reference point, I wanted to include a couple of Italianate doors on varying ends of the spectrum, just to see the similarities to what's going in this case. The one on the left is, a fairly basic Italianate door, but still representative of the style. And the one on the right is more of an elaborate design. But again, you can see the similarities between both of these doors and what is being proposed at 497 Kingston. Moving on to the window replacements. So the idea is to replace, as I mentioned, all of the windows on the historic masonry part of the building. There will also be window replacements on the rear addition, but because that is a contemporary addition, that's not being covered in the heritage permit. Currently, all of the windows are not functional because they are covered by storm windows. So you can see a little bit here based on the reflection that it's, you've got these storm windows on the outside. Beneath them are the original operable windows. So in cases where we have original windows, we typically want to see those preserved if they're in good working condition. That's not the plan here. But I was quite happy when the plans did come in for the window replacements that they're going with top of the line replica windows. So all of the replacement windows will be from the Norwood line, and they will be single hung operable windows, all wood windows matching the original type, size, style, and profile. So whatever's in there right now in terms of the original design will be going back. The difference is you will have the newer technology for things like climate control and having a good R rating, but they will essentially look the part of what's there now and sort of play the part in terms of material as well. So one of the things we like to make sure of when we are seeing replacement windows is that they do have the exterior muntins. So these are the division bars on the outside that break the glass into various lights. A lot of the newer style heritage type windows have an internal muntin that's wedged between the 2 pieces of glass. And while it looks the part from a distance, when you get anywhere close, that lack of sort of 3 dimensions really shows, and it looks artificial. So in this case, that's not what they have. There is an internal division as well, but there's also a muntin attached to the exterior of the glass, which gives it that appearance of an original window. There are a number of decorative inserts where there are arched windows. So you may be able to see in this arched window here, as well as the upper story one here and this lower story window, and even this small window here. There are some carved wood details in there right now. Those are in good condition, and those will be retained and preserved and put back into place upon the completion of the project. So I spoke about the Norwood line sort of being the top of the line when you look at the available product out there. They were the window of choice for the Deneen project in Toronto, which is an award-winning heritage conservation project that you see on the top left there. They're pretty much capable of designing any kind of window that you would ever see in a historic building. So actually, one of the interesting things on the Deneen building is that these windows right at the corner are actually all curved to fit the profile of the curve in the building, and they were able to rebuild those to spec and make them match what had been there before. And just along the bottom, I have some examples of the recent work that they've done on other projects. So very good company, very competent company in terms of making good, long-lasting products that look the part for heritage properties. So the last part of the project is the replacement of the window sills. And the photo that you see here was actually taken during the masonry project back in 2017. So I imagine the state of these sills is even worse than it was back then, now being 5 years later. So the house was originally constructed with wooden window sills, which have all begun to rot and are losing their material integrity. The proposal is to replace all of these sills with new limestone sills. So this is one I had to think carefully about before presenting to the committee because, as I'm sure you'll all remember from past situations where something is being removed from a building, we typically try to put back what had been there in the past. That's sort of a general principle with heritage conservation. And if you can put back the original material or even preserve the original material, that's really what you should be doing. As you can see from the photo here, the condition of these sills is quite bad. And the idea for going to a limestone sill is that it'll just hold up better over time. So considering those things, I think there are two questions that really needed to be asked. One was, do wood sills contribute to the heritage value of this building? And secondly, would the introduction of stone sills, in their place, detract from the heritage value of the building? So in order to get a better sense of that, I did a little bit of research. And the first thing I did was to look around Ontario at all kinds of similar buildings from the same era that demonstrate an Italianate design. In nearly all cases where I found Italianate buildings either constructed of brick or of stone, the sills were also stone. So wherever I did see a wooden building, it was wood sills. So there is already a correlation between the cladding material and the type of sill. So I would say it's somewhat unique in a provincial context to see a brick Italianate building with wooden sills. However, when we do look at the other Italianate buildings throughout the town, wood sills seem to be predominant here, which is quite interesting. So 68 Church Street was wood sills. 66 Church Street, also wood sills, and now they've been covered over with aluminum flashing. This building just down the street from the subject site, wood sills. And then another one a little across town near Harwood North on Tadman Drive. This one has wood sills as well. So it really got me thinking about the fact that the material used for the sills is wood and why that would be when that doesn't tend to be the case anywhere else. And what I think it comes down to, and this is just a hypothesis that I started to develop going through this, is that there are not any readily available limestone quarries in this area. So limestone for sills isn't something that would have been probably inexpensive or highly available back in the 1870s when the building was built. So you're making wood windows, you have wood available, you just make the sills out of wood. And I think that's what we've seen around town, because it is interesting when you look at other buildings from the same era. So this is the church just down the street from the subject site, which was built in 1891. It does have stone sills. Similarly, the St. Francis Center, which was built in the 1870s, has stone sills. So where there were these larger projects that I think could probably spare a little more expense and they were a little more extravagant in terms of their design, it was common to see those stone sills. So from my perspective, while we do have an interesting little trend with the domestic use of wood, I don't think it really is something that's essential to retain the heritage value of the property. So the way I looked at it is, despite the local precedent, the replacement of the wood sills only slightly impacts the overall heritage value of the building. Wood sills are not extremely rare. Losing them from one building isn't going to change the fact that they're used in other buildings. We have lots of examples of wood sills, and we know it's quite common elsewhere to see limestone sills in buildings of this type. Also, in terms of a visual impact, with all of these buildings I showed on previous slides, you probably wouldn't be able to tell from the street whether they were wood or whether they were stone. I actually had to go out to the sites and just the other night and look by, and in some case kind of knock on them to find out what they were. So it isn't something that's going to have any significant impact on the sort of visuals of the property. And because of that, I'm not too concerned. I think in terms of the long-term integrity of this building and knowing that, rot is something you always will deal with wood, it makes sense to go with these stone sills in this case. So in terms of our role here tonight, because this is a significant project, I think it's reasonable and responsible for the committee to get to have some input into whether or not this is a project that we want to support. The fact that this does involve the removal of original features means that it's not something that I would be comfortable with at a staff level making a decision on. I think these types of projects are, essentially the purpose of the Heritage Committee, being able to look at this as a group, have some conversation and discussion about it, and determine whether or not this is something that we should be approving. So if members are satisfied with the proposal and want to provide support, then at that point, I could move forward with issuing a heritage permit. If council or if HAC members do not support this application, what would happen is we'd have to advance this up the ladder, take this to council, and then a decision would be made by council as to whether or not they wanted to allow for these changes or, perhaps change the type of work that's being proposed. So with that said, maybe I'll turn it back to the chair for a moment to field any questions that we have.
Thanks, Mike. Are there any questions from committee members about the next move? Go ahead, Pam. You're muted.
Question, because it's really hard to see here on this picture. How many lights over, I know the small windows are probably 1/1, but the larger windows are 2/2?
Yes, for the most part. And there is a schedule for all of the window replacements that I can provide to the committee members if they'd like to see it. That provides details on all of them. But essentially whatever's there now is getting replaced with a like product. So it is 1/1 in most cases. But as you've suggested, some of the larger windows are 2/2 or they're twinned 1/1 windows.
Okay. And this in the same proportion. I just want to make a comment. I mean, this is somebody's home and, they need to live in it and respect the heritage of it, but they have to be able to open the windows. And the wood sills, even though it is seems to be the example in the town, if they're not properly looked after, they will compromise the integrity of the structure eventually. So, from my perspective, I don't have any trouble. I think that keeping the structure sound is the most important thing, and somebody has to live in it. So,
Stephen?
Yeah, I feel that the homeowners are very conscientious when they've gone out and got a heritage contractor to look after the problems that they're having with the windows and put a proper door in, because that one really doesn't suit the house. And honestly, I think that the changing of the sills from wood to a limestone product is truly not going to hurt the house, because if these people ever decide 5 years from now to sell this house, the next person might come in and, if it was wood, decide to do the same that someone else has done, put aluminum capping on it, and then it takes away from it all. If it's limestone, it's going to stay limestone. So I think I'm rather in favor of all the work these people are doing. It is, as Pam said, it's someone's home, and I'm sure the windows are with the age are probably a little drafty, and their hydro bills are pretty high, or their heating bills are pretty high. So I'm rather in favor of it. Thank you.
Any other questions? So I guess, Michael, the next move for us would be to, yes, make a motion, and there it is.
So again, as I always say, this is a draft motion. It sounds like, at least from the members we've heard from, there is support from the project. So this is a draft motion that would be in favor of support. As I always say, it's not essential that you follow this format or even that you support this project. So, whatever the committee feels they want to do, this is just there to help serve you as an example.
Okay, do you like the wording of the motion, committee members?
Yes.
Everybody looks happy, so shall we?
I'll move it.
Good. Those in favor, raise your hands. And
Oh, Mr. Chair, we need a seconder.
oh, seconder, sorry. Who would like to second that? Anderson? Very good. Okay, now we have our show of hands. Looks like that passes.
All right, thank you. So we'll move right along to the second item, which is updates on the Durham-Scarborough Bus Rapid Transit Project. So it has been a while since I've brought formal updates on this item. I think the last time was back in October of 2020. But just as a reminder, Metrolinx is working with Durham Regional Transit and the Toronto Transit Commission to plan a 36-kilometer rapid transit corridor along Kingston Road between Scarborough and Oshawa. And essentially, this will have dedicated bus lanes at the center of the street. And the purpose of that is to result in more reliable service with shorter travel times between locations. So the project team working on this is currently still completing technical studies, but they're working towards completing more detailed plans. A quick overview here showing the route of the project, which depending on which way you're looking at it, starts in downtown Oshawa and heads along to Scarborough Town Center. Now, this is something that was posted recently. This is a rendering of the project. So you can see the colored lanes through the middle of the street. Those obviously signify the dedicated transit lanes for buses, but it's also interesting to note the sheltered areas on either side of the intersection to accommodate travelers as they're both loading on and off of these buses. One of the reasons that the configuration has these at the center rather than the side as they have been in the past and in other areas throughout the province is there is an expectation down the road that this will actually become a light rail transit project. And that rail system will run through the center of the street. So a lot of the work they're doing now, the intention is, it lasts for the long haul. They won't have to tear everything up and redo it when they do eventually make that shift over to light rail. This is another image here, just showing what these shelters could look like. This is all very early sort of preliminary renderings. So don't read too much into those. I think they're just there to help, people understand exactly what this project could look like. And we'll have to send them a note to say that they're missing the mural on the side of the old Dunbar store over there. I should have added that on myself. So a summary of what's been completed so far. Back last October, we talked a little bit about the cultural heritage evaluation reports. So the shares that had been conducted by ASI to confirm which properties on the route had heritage value and may be impacted by the project. In the end, there were seven properties identified as being heritage and being impacted by this project. They were 566, 571, 575, 577, 579, 601, and then 607 to 611 Kingston Road West. Now, I think it's interesting to note that two of these buildings were not originally identified by the consultant as being heritage. So the buildings at 601 and 607 to 611 were not identified as heritage buildings, but then after we provided some input about the history of those buildings, ASI determined, yes, they did meet provincial criteria and they did add them onto the list. So this is a rendering here, similar to what I showed back in October 2020, but perhaps a little bit more detailed at this stage, which gives a sense of the layout of the right-of-way and how it will impact the existing properties. So these sort of hot pink lines that you see are the current property lines. So you can see that there are significant impacts to a number of properties. The turquoise colored line here shows what the new property lines will be. So when you're looking at the heritage properties being impacted, you can see that the impacts, especially on the west side of Church, are extremely significant. So when you look at the building at 607 and 611, most of that building as it currently exists will be in the right of way. And the same is true for 601, which is right on the corner. So just as a quick reference point, this is the building at 607 to 611. This is an older image. Some of you may have been by recently and seen that there's new siding on there. And that's all a result of a car accident that happened just a few months ago. So same building, looks a little bit different on the outside. And then this is the building right at the corner, not in the greatest condition, but a lot of interesting history to it. This was the original Chapman store. So when we look at the east side of Church, we've got similar scenarios in terms of the properties being impacted, mainly being on the south side of the road. But in this case, the impacts aren't as significant. So the first one we see is 579. In this case, it looks like the sidewalk is running through the porch. So, still there's not compatibility shown here. There's going to have to be some sort of solution to this issue. Same type of thing at 577 and 575, which are a semi-detached building. 571 is the one that has the most significant impacts in terms of, the sidewalk is running essentially through the front of the building. And then one building that hadn't been impacted in the past, but now does show impacts based on the latest revisions to the plans, is 566 on the north side, which is actually already designated under the Ontario Heritage Act. So all of these other properties are on our inventory, but they are not designated. 566 is. And currently it's showing impacts from the sidewalk onto the enclosed porch on that property. So just as a reminder here, this is 579, 577, and 575, which are one building. 571, so this is the one with the most major impacts because it's already quite close to the street. And then this is 566, which is the designated building. So over the last year and a half or so, there have been a number of reports, primarily in draft form, that have come to the town for my review. These have all been technical reports looking at anything kind of heritage related. So there's one very general report which looks at all of the heritage properties along this route from Oshawa to Scarborough. That's the Cultural Heritage Report. But then there have also been individual cultural heritage evaluation reports for all of the properties where there would actually be impact. So that is seven properties. Where impacts to heritage buildings are expected, a resource-specific heritage impact assessment will be required. So this will be a document that takes the next steps from the share. The share said, here's what we know about the property. Does it have heritage value? And in all cases, after our input, the answer was yes, the property has heritage value. Now that we know there are going to be impacts, the next step is to say, what are we going to do about those impacts? Will a building be demolished because of them? Will a building have its porch removed? Will the entire building be lifted up and moved back on its site? We have no idea, and we aren't going to have any idea until we get those property-specific heritage impact assessments in our hands. And we've been told from the beginning of this project that those HIAs wouldn't be available until the detailed design phase, which I think we're coming into right about now. So when you look at the timeline for this project, strategic planning went, way back. That's been completed. The options analysis was done in 2018. Over the last few years, they've been working away on the preliminary design and the transit project assessment process. As of January 21st, so just a couple of weeks ago, they released their environmental project report, which is available now for a 30-day comment period. The next step, which unfortunately on this diagram doesn't have any timing to it, but the next step is the detailed design and the full business case. So this is the step where we get the HIAs and we finally hear what they're planning to do with these buildings that are going to be impacted and how are they going to mitigate those impacts. So up to this point, I've just done my best to keep on top of the information coming in and making sure that it was all consistent, it was all accurate based on the records that we had. And wherever there were questions or issues, I would communicate that to Metrolinx and they would provide responses. So one of the things I think was the most important for us to make abundantly clear is that the town would not support any situation where any heritage buildings were demolished or removed because of this project. So we're going to do whatever we can to ensure the preservation of all of these impacted buildings. I've been happy to see that there has been discussion about moving some of these buildings, yet we can't say with any certainty that will happen until we get those HIAs and actually see it, confirmed through the report that the intention is to relocate these buildings. So I will be watching very closely for those and sharing those reports with the committee as soon as they're received. One of the other interesting things that has come out of this back and forth is there have been a few instances where, especially early on during COVID, the consultants weren't able to collect the type of information that we would typically see during the share process because they weren't able to access archives and get into buildings and that sort of thing. So as we have had a few stages where restrictions were reduced, the consultants did keep at it. And on a few occasions, they were able to collect more information. One of those cases was involving the property shown here, 607 to 611. So this is a property that we have this historic image of from the 1930s with the big, double-decker veranda on the front. And we've always had some expectation that this was sort of a stagecoach stop from early days. And it is Georgian architecture, which does tend to be quite early buildings. Yet our records showed that this was a building from 1880. So after the consultants were able to get their hands on some more information, they did actually determine that the construction date of this building was between 1855 and 1861. So it is significantly older than we originally gave it credit for. And I think that will really come into play in terms of pushing an agenda to preserve this building rather than just demolishing it. So I think it's that kind of information coming out through the consultants' work has been really, really helpful. So what's next for us? As I mentioned, there's not much that we can do until we receive the completed HIAs. As soon as those are received, I will review those and I will share them with the committee. If what we see through the HIAs is any instances of demolition or removal of heritage attributes, we're going to have to put together a game plan in terms of doing our very best to convince the province that it is in their best interest as well as our best interests to preserve these features or preserve these buildings. This is a really unique scenario because we have a province-led project. And when the province leads a project that has municipal involvement, unfortunately, there's not that much municipalities can do. Municipalities are not at the level of the province, obviously. So the province does have more power than the municipalities, and essentially what they say goes. So we can do our best to try to influence the project, but I have fielded a number of calls recently where people were asking, is there anything we can do? Can we make sure that they don't demolish these buildings? The short answer is no. There's really nothing formal that we can do, but we can try to make convincing cases, even going so far as designating some of these properties in order to, present the image of these being protected heritage properties to the public. In the end, the province doesn't have to abide to municipal heritage designations, but in terms of, public opinion of the project and that sort of thing, it could be something that we want to pursue. But before I think we even consider going down that road, first things first, and we need to get these HIAs. We need to see exactly what is going to be proposed for all of these impacted properties. So with that, I'll turn it back over to Jeff to field any questions or comments.
Any questions or comments, people? Pam, I see your hand up. Let's start with you.
I'm just wondering, well, first a comment before I forget. The staging in that you showed the picture of the double-decker, there is one that is so similar to that in Upper Canada Village, which would have, some history around the purpose it served in, the development of the province, et cetera, et cetera. Anyway, the other thing I wanted to ask, though, is this project has, I see that is extended, it's gone through Markham, I believe, et cetera. What is the track record so far in preserving heritage buildings or working with the municipality? Have they developed a track record?
So this particular project is confined to, Kingston Road between Oshawa and Scarborough. But there have been other similar projects. Right. So yes, there's one running through York Region. In those cases, most often the heritage areas just sit a little off of where the main impacts are, but there have been some situations where they have run through areas where there have been a number of heritage buildings. And I think the track record is quite good. But context is everything. And if you have a wider right-of-way, there's no problem with a project like this and preserving the buildings. The situations really come about when you've got, this plans for a multi-lane highway running through an area that was traditionally a village, which is what we have here. So when you look at the entire route of this project, this area through Pickering Village really is the pinch point. And we've already seen them make certain concessions to the design. So in terms of the number of lanes, they only have one lane running in a westerly direction now in order to limit impacts on heritage. But they couldn't really go beyond that because, if they were to reduce to one lane in each directions, then the traffic impacts would be so significant that, it might not be worth doing the project at all. So I think even on this particular project to this point, the track record is quite good and they've made some commitment, as I said, to things in the past, very informally, but they have raised, the issue of relocating buildings on their lot, which is typically something that I have to do as a heritage planner. I have to say, whoa, before you guys demolish that, why don't you consider moving it back? They were the ones that raised that as a potential option in this case, which is quite good in my eyes. The province does have heritage standards that they have to abide by. those standards don't have much in the way of teeth. They're pretty open-ended. So I think they always will do their best to follow those guidelines. But when situations get tough and difficult decisions need to be made between heritage and traffic or heritage and anything else, sometimes we don't win. So I think the short answer is I think their track record's quite good, but I don't think we can necessarily compare what's been done in other areas to what's happening right here.
Okay, thank you.
Bruce, go ahead.
I think the real lose in this situation is making the westbound traffic down to one lane through Pickering Village. I don't see how that's a thing that we could at all live with, living right there. I know with 2 lanes and the turn lane, that light backs up to over halfway to Westney Road to start with. So how can we go down to 1 lane there? I think that's a huge concern. I know it's not the Heritage Committee's concern, but me as a person that lives in the area, it just seems ridiculous.
Any other comments?
Yeah, I've got one.
Go ahead, Beverly.
I'm just wondering, when you're talking about moving these buildings back, who's responsible for paying for that? The owners or the bully province that wants to do it?
So it would be a project cost. It wouldn't be the property owners. This is a project that the province is bringing on, so any impacts have to be dealt with by them. So one thing that I failed to mention, I'll step back a little bit here, is in almost every situation, almost every case where there is a property that fronts on to Kingston Road, the province will have to take some property from the frontage. In most cases, there's no impacts on buildings at all. They might take, 3 meters of a front lawn or something like that. Property owners will be compensated for that. It will essentially be an expropriation at a very small scale, and they will be given market value for that property. In cases where there are significant impacts to buildings, my expectation and what it seems like the heritage reports are laying out is that the province will have to purchase the property, and then that heritage building will become their own, and then they will be responsible for moving it. So it's also interesting to note, if they do purchase a property, all of a sudden, new standards kick in for what they're allowed to do and what they're not allowed to do. As soon as they take ownership of a property, it has to be evaluated under a regulation known as 1006. So we always talk about 906, which is the criteria for municipal designation. 1006 is the criteria for provincial significance. So when they do a 1006 evaluation, if any of these properties are determined to have provincial significance, and I think there likely is a case for some of them, there become very clear standards for what they can do with that. For the properties that still met 906 but don't have provincial significance, there's some direction in the provincial policies for what they need to do. They need to make best efforts, for example, to preserve heritage, but there's nothing hard in terms of any responsibilities they have. They could make the judgment call to say, we did our best, but look, this property is only of municipal significance. We're going to have to do away with it for the sake of the project. So that's why the HIAs are so important, because we truly don't have any sense of what's planned for any of these impacted buildings. There may even be cases where they find a way to sort of weave a sidewalk around it and there's no impact at all. We just have to wait and see. But going back to your original question, the expense would never be on the owners. It would always be on the province.
And what are the chances of this changing after the provincial election?
It's a good question. I mean,
we hold off long enough that it might change. It might be, would be lovely if they canceled it altogether, but
it's difficult to say. I mean, a project like this it's been going on for a long time now. And my expectation is the fact that it's made it this far along and the amount of money that's been spent on this to date, I think would justify this being held on to and continuing. However, with politics, you never know, right? There have been bigger projects in the past that have been canceled. So it's really difficult to say. I think one of the important things to remember with this, and this is what makes it such a difficult project for me, is I know it will have impacts on the heritage properties, and I don't like that. That's not a good thing in my eyes. But from a city building perspective and sort of transit perspective and connections to other communities, this is a very good thing. Having a reliable service down Kingston Road, especially with the types of developments we're seeing through Durham Region on this high order transit corridor, that's going to do wonderful things for the growth of this area and giving people options other than cars. So it's a tricky one because parts of it I don't like, but other parts I think are going to be quite beneficial to the town in the long run.
I guess by way of a closing comment, I'm wondering, with the support of the committee, if we could reach out to other heritage committees across Durham Region and put out a unified message about this development. The province may not listen just to one little municipality, but if Pickering, Ajax, Whitby, Clarington, and Oshawa all come and sign on the same piece of paper, there's a chance I might get listened to. So I wonder, with the committee's indulgence, that's something I might explore, is reaching out to other committees and seeing what they think. Go ahead, Pam.
I've been thinking through this whole presentation, what are they thinking in Whitby? It has to go right through the four corners. And
Yep.
I wouldn't say that that's particularly wider than what we have. And I, different people that I know in Whitby are already, paying attention. But I'd really be interested in what they're saying, because they've got a lot of heritage buildings around that corridor and that four corners. And I can't imagine that theirs are all sitting outside of the allowance. Just my thought.
Well, that huge conglomeration known as Metrolinx will probably listen more carefully to a unified message coming from all the municipalities rather than a bunch of different messages. So that's perhaps something we can explore. I can volunteer to do that with the permission of the committee, of course. And if you get a chance, Mike's been there already, but if you get a chance, go to the Metrolinx site and pull up the Durham BRT information. There's a wealth of pictures and stats and mock-ups of what this thing will look like. It's almost so much material it'll blow you over. And the fact that Mike was able to sift through and present what I think is the important stuff is very good. But you should go there, and if you want to participate as a private citizen, you can get yourself on their email address and you can make comments, because that's the only way you're going to get heard. They don't really do in-person consultations anymore. They still happen, but now citizen participation is electronic. So I strongly urge you guys to go to the Metrolinx site, pull up what you see, and make a comment. That's it for me.
All right, so we'll move right along, and I'll just add to Jeff's comment there about the other municipalities. So we have a bit of a informal network amongst heritage planners in Durham Region. So we have discussed this project, and the other municipalities are providing feedback just as we have been. But they're sort of stuck in the same place as we are. They know where impacts are expected, yet they don't know how they're going to be mitigated. So all of us are kind of waiting on a little more information before we can really make any direct comments back to the province and Metrolinx. All right, so moving on to the next item then. 527 Kingston Road West and a potential redevelopment on this site. So this is one I just, there's no intention to make a motion of any kind here. This is really just for information. I want to try to get a little bit ahead of the redevelopment here. So we're all kind of on the same page if we're forced into making any urgent sort of moves on this one. So 527 is a property again on the south side of Kingston Road. It is one that used to be a Century 21 real estate office, but has been vacant for some time now. A somewhat modest kind of arts and crafts type building, but beautifully landscaped when it's taken care of, and still some nice character to this property. So the property was recently purchased by a person who is looking to redevelop it. And the plans immediately were to demolish the existing building and to construct a new heritage style apartment building. Now, it's interesting to note that the gentleman who purchased this property has also purchased 522 on the north side of Kingston, which we would have discussed years ago, and has a similar development concept in the works for that property, but that property is much smaller. So what he's hoping to do is kind of take that blueprint, expand it to the larger property, and move forward with a similar type development. Now, this property doesn't have any official heritage status. It's not designated, but we do include it on our list of non-designated heritage properties. So back when we evaluated it several years ago, we determined that it hit on a number of different criteria under Regulation 906. As soon as I heard from the new owner that they're looking to redevelop, I said, the first thing that you should do is go out and get a share done, a cultural heritage evaluation report by a heritage consultant, because if this building is determined formally to have heritage value, then that's something that we're going to want to preserve. We think it has heritage value, but who knows? Maybe a consultant would see otherwise and would kind of change our opinion in terms of its development potential. So he did go out and he got a share done. Actually had to end up getting a few shares done because the first ones weren't quite up to the standard of what we were looking for. But what the most recent one by a qualified person determined was that in their perspective, in their professional opinion, it didn't hit the three that we said it did, but it did hit one of those three. And that's all you need in order to move forward with a designation. So it determined that the property is important in defining, maintaining, or supporting the character of an area. So with that, we have all of the sort of backup that we would need if we ever decided to move forward with a designation. Not only have we evaluated this to meet the criteria, so has a professional heritage consultant. So after receiving that document, and I did not pass that document along to the committee because it's still in a draft stage. So it came in December 23rd, just before the holidays. I had a quick review and then followed up with a phone call to the proponent and said, based on what it says in the report that this property has heritage value, I'd like you to consider, rather than demolishing the building and rebuilding in its place, perhaps retaining the building and then building something in behind. As you see on this slide, this is a very large lot. There's a ton of area in behind the existing house that could be developed. So why not make better use of that space? And then the existing house could be retained and used as a commercial operation or something similar to that. I think because he had in mind something entirely different that involved the demolition, he didn't want to sway from that. So his expectation is still that, in all likelihood, he's going to want to come forward with a demolition permit, demolish the existing building, and then go ahead and build what he has planned. And to his credit, he does seem very interested in heritage. He does seem to have a genuine kind of respect for wanting to keep things that have a heritage design. However, I don't think he has a fulsome understanding of the value of sort of local context for heritage conservation. So when he was providing some design references to say, I want to build in a heritage style, these were the types of things we were getting, which, they all are heritage buildings, but they're not the types of heritage architecture that you would see in Pickering Village. So while these are all beautiful buildings, they're not exactly what we would expect. And they would actually, something in this style would detract from the heritage of the area. It would be confusing to what is authentic through the Pickering Village area. So as I said, at this point, there's no action that we need to take immediately. I'm going to continue to keep having discussions with the property owner in advance of any formal submission, because right now, nothing's on the books, nothing's been applied for. He's just kind of reaching out to put out some feelers and get a sense of the types of things we'd be looking for. If we do want to see the building preserved and he decides to move forward with a demolition permit, our only option in order to save this building may be to move forward with an emergency heritage designation. So that's why I wanted to get this out there. So everyone's aware of this situation. And if it is the case that we get a demolition permit, we'll have to call an emergency meeting because we'll have to work within the timeframes provided under the Building Code Act, which is 10 days to get that demo permit approved. And we will have to take steps to initiate the designation process, which will essentially halt the demo process if that is a direction we decide to go. And if we did do that, eventually we would have to take that heritage designation to council, and they would make the final decision on whether or not they wanted to support the designation. So through that process, they would essentially be saying, if they want to preserve the building, okay, designate it. If they're against designation, well, in effect, that's really saying that this property is up for redevelopment. So that's, the property owners should be able to redevelop as they see fit, obviously with planning staff's input in terms of design and that sort of thing. But yeah, just wanted to lay that out for everyone that this project could go in that direction if they do apply to demolish the building. So any questions or comments on that one? Nope. All right, move along. The next update is somewhat of an unexpected one. It's about General Engineering Company Canada Limited. Some of you may be familiar with this name. I was not. So just before the holidays, I was pulling together some research for a new retirement type building that's being constructed in Ajax. They reached out and asked to get some historic photos from Ajax to put into their lobby, because whenever they develop a new building, they like to present the local history in that building. So I was pulling together a number of DIL photos and writing up quick little sort of descriptions of each of those photos. And I came across a reference to General Engineering Company Canada, which was known as GECO, which was a munitions factory in Scarborough during World War II. This struck me as a surprise because I've been working with the town now for several years and quite involved in the history of DIL and trying to commemorate the DIL history. I had never heard about GECO. So I reached out to Brenda Kriz actually right away to say, what is this? How have I been in the shadows this whole time? And she mentioned that town staff, her in particular, was aware of GECO, didn't know much of the history, but it kind of came to light during the Bomb Girls production by CBC, because a lot of what they based that on wasn't just DIL, it was also GECO and Scarborough. So I'm sure I should have been focused on other things those last few days before the holidays, kind of getting my projects wrapped up. But this one couldn't kind of escape my brain, and I had to follow up and do some research just to find out a little more. So that's what I'll present today. So I think one of the really interesting things, as I already mentioned, is that I went back through all of the main texts that we have that include information on DIL, and not a single one mentioned GECO. And then it really got me thinking about these claims of DIL being the largest shell filling plant in the British Empire, because when you see the stats I'm about to present, it really makes you question that claim, or at least look at it in a different light. And specifically, what is meant when we say it was the largest shell filling plant in the British Empire? So some of the details that I was able to pull out about GECO and compare them directly to DIL. Obviously, they were very close to one another, just down the road in Scarborough. In both cases, it was agricultural land that was expropriated during the war to construct these facilities. The construction of DIL started a little bit earlier. Discussions really got underway in February 1940, or construction, I should say, really got underway in February 1940. Whereas at GECO, it wasn't until the following year, almost a year later. But when you look at the construction finish, DIL, we don't have any hard date for the finish of construction, whereas GECO, there is. This was a 7-month build where they built this entire campus from January to July of the same year. DIL is far larger when you look at it. It's probably 8 or 9 times the size of GECO at over 2,800 acres. But when you look at the number of buildings, they're actually comparable. GECO has a few less than DIL, but not that many less. And where things really start to get interesting is when you look at the production there. In terms of employees, GECO had more than double what we had at DIL. And when you look at the total production of shells, you're looking at 256 million compared to our 40 million. So that's what I was referring to when we talk about the largest shell filling operation in the British Empire. Obviously, if we're looking at land size, yes, DIL was. But if we are looking at it from a production standpoint, DIL isn't even close to what GECO was able to produce. Also interesting to note that there are quite a few buildings remaining in Scarborough relating to this campus. And even when you look at the sort of social aspects of life in these places during the Second World War, very, very familiar designs. Both had their own local newspapers. So you really see the sort of history of both mimicking one another. This is a drawing of the construction plans compared to an aerial view following the actual construction. And you'll see that it's remarkably precise. And I guess this is part of what happens when you build something in 7 months. Everything's built exactly to spec, and you see a final product that is essentially exactly what was down on paper. This is also quite a celebrated site. So this is a heritage plaque to Scarborough's Golden Mile, which gives the history about GECO and how really that was the impetus to develop that area into a real industrial sort of haven through the 1950s. So this is a well-known history, which made it even more surprising that I personally hadn't been aware of it until I came across some of this recent information. So the reason I really bring it up is just it could be an opportunity for further research. I was quite interested by some of the information I came across, but I didn't do much of a deep dive at all. I kind of took some surface level articles and pulled out what I needed to make the comparisons. But I think it could be an interesting research project, maybe even something that we would consider through a future heritage video. There's all kinds of information available on GECO. So, that obviously makes research a little easier. And the fact that a number of the buildings still exist is quite unique too. And there are lots of accounts of underground tunnels remaining. So obviously these aren't publicly accessible, but it is interesting to know that people in recent years have bought buildings and then later discovered that they were connected to other areas by tunnel, which they did not know prior to the purchase. And I think one of the questions is, does the existence of GECO threaten the legacy of DIL? I think that's a really, really important question. DIL is extremely important, and our history in Ajax is extremely important, not just locally, but I think to the history of Canada and the overall history of the Second World War. And nothing will ever take that away. But one of the first thoughts I had when I came across this GECO information was how it would impact something like our request to Parks Canada to name DIL as a National Historic Event. Is the fact that there was another similar campus just down the street that actually produced far more shells, is that going to eliminate or at least detract from some of the significance of our site in terms of being given national commemoration? I'm not really sure. But it is one of those things that, like I said, when I came across it, I thought it was important to bring up to the committee in case there are members that would like to dive a little deeper into this. So with that, I'll turn it over to any questions or comments that people may have.
Go ahead, Stephen.
Yes. During the time I was doing the DIL walking tours and different things, there was one day, maybe it was a Jane's Walk, I think. I had 3 people from Scarborough come over and we had a long conversation about this exact thing. And I said, I really had no information on it. I said, do you know what it was called? And they said, no, we don't. But I think one of the relatives worked there and they said that they were like a machinist. They made the brass outer shell for the munitions, and I don't know if they did actually filling the shells or were they sent here to Ajax to be filled. So I know, they said they didn't know all about it, but they knew about it. So
interesting, yeah. So and actually, Stephen, I was thinking about you when I came across this because I knew this DIL was something that you had a lot of information about the history of it and thought this is something that may interest you. And it would be interesting to know a little bit about how, the operations, as you said, at both of these plants, were they doing the same things or was one building the shell, the other one was filling it? I'm not entirely sure.
No.
Go ahead, Beverly.
Yeah, I'm just wondering, does Scarborough have a heritage committee or is that all under Toronto?
So it all falls under Toronto, but I know that they do have different sort of preservation panels for different parts of the city. And I think there is one for Scarborough, or that at least incorporates Scarborough. So, and there may even be, I think there's likely a historical society as well in Scarborough. So I think there's lots of opportunities to connect with other organizations that would have lots of information. There's also a book. The reason I came across this was I think I did something as simple as Google Bomb Girls expecting to find stuff about DIL. And the first thing I came across was a book written in recent years, I think probably in the last 10 or so years, about GECO. And it's from a woman that lives in Scarborough and found it amazing that she didn't know about the history and decided to write the book on it. So lots of opportunities for connecting with other people out there with a wealth of information.
Well, I seem to recall that, I don't know whether it was on a Doors Open or something with that Scarborough historical little building that's up, I want to say Warden, but I'm not sure. And I came across this once before, And I understood it that the Scarborough DIL plant, for lack of a better word, didn't make the bombs like we do. They did either smaller munitions, such as bullets or things like that, or even the extra large ones that we use. So I didn't think that we were exactly the same as far as, like the types of munitions that we were building. So whether that makes any difference or not, but I came across this somewhere along in the Doors Open thing. And I think it was at that Scarborough historical little village.
Okay.
Yeah, I can't remember where it is. I just remember a white and green building and the things like that. So it might be a good idea to sort of connect with them and see what kind of information we have. And if we have to correct our Parks Canada presentation or our ideas about that, then maybe it might trigger them to agree to us having that designation sooner rather than later.
Yeah.
This designation is just crying out for a friendly rivalry.
You made bigger bombs than you did.
I see two aged gentlemen sitting on a bench debating who did more for what. Kind of like you ever watched the Simpsons, Springfield versus Shelbyville. I think that's what it's crying out for, but that's just me.
All right. So if there's no further questions on that one, I'll move along to the last item, which is a very quick one. So it relates to a heritage permit for 572 Kingston Road West, which is a designated property known as the Pert House. So 572 this time is on the north side of Kingston Road. And it, again, is somewhat modest looking building, but this is one that has been designated in the past. And it is a sort of wood style or wood clad building this time. So it was a very simple project that first was applied for. The owner had mentioned that some of the customers or people frequenting the business were having a hard time in the bad weather getting up and down the exterior steps without a handrail. So they just wanted to put in a handrail, very simple. They had something in mind, which was a simple aluminum rail. And originally the plan was to connect it to the porch and to remove part of the porch and do all kinds of stuff to get it in there. And I thought there was probably a simpler way to do this project. And that would be just to have it fixed to the existing steps, not touching the porch in any way. That way, if we didn't have to start talking about removing parts of the porch and that sort of thing, I would be able to issue a permit at the staff level. And in the end, they said, okay, that is something we could do. We could do a standalone handrail design with this sort of modular unit that is not attached to the building, so it wouldn't have to be heritage materials. You could go with that standard aluminum design, and if that was the case, there would be no consultation needed. So that is, in fact, what they revised the plans to, and I granted approval back on January 21st. So just a sort of rendering so you understand what I'm talking about. They will be putting in just a standard black aluminum handrail on this property. And we don't have to get any more involved than that. So just quick one and done, but thought that it was relevant to bring up to the committee, just so you know a permit was issued for that purpose. Any questions or concerns about that one?
Nope.
All right. Well, then that is it for me. Thank you, everyone.
So the next item we have, thank you, Michael. The next thing we have on the agenda is the Heritage Minute video project update. And I'm happy to say we've got all the pieces together and had some new additions of material. Thank you for sleuthing this out to my fellow committee members. It's going to make a big difference. So I will send a rough cut to people involved in the project, and you can say yay or nay, but we're ready to send another one out very soon. And so that's it for the Heritage video project. Next item on the agenda is correspondence.
Jeff,
Go ahead, Neil.
excuse me, what happened to the previous one, the other one on Kingston Road? Did that get published?
It's been submitted. I don't know if it's been published or not, but
Mike?
Yeah, I'll follow up on that one. I know it was submitted to our communications department. I'll see if they actually posted it anywhere, and then I'll send an update to the committee.
that would be great. That would be great.
Jeff,
Yes.
just one thing about the Simcoe Street Cemetery. There's a gentleman now, his name's Colin Wallace. He kind of looks after the cemetery for the town during the summer months. He goes down and plants flowers and makes sure that the area is kept tidy. So I don't know if it would be, anything to put a little blurb in at the end of the thing, or if it's too late.
Not at all. We can add some voice to that and give them a plug. Maybe even catch them in action. That would be good.
Yeah. Oh, well, we'll talk to him.
Good.
One thing, Jeff,
Go ahead.
I don't know whether I had a thought, I guess it was a month or so ago. I sent it to Sarah. I don't know whether it went along, but just about your Heritage Minute things. I came across some things in our, the Ajax Pickering archive sort of thing about the University of Toronto and how they use the DIL buildings. I didn't know if you wanted to sort of bring that up as one of a future subject idea. There's a plaque down at the community center about how the university used some of the buildings. There aren't any buildings, but it might, picking up pictures or something from that Heritage website or that Pickering, Ajax Pickering Library archive sort of thing. There's things in there about it. So I just bringing it up now rather than in later business or something because we're on the Heritage Minutes thing. So that's another subject that we could look at.
Thank you. Pam, go ahead.
I think we had discussed the DIL and what aspect of that we hadn't really decided as being the next video. And we haven't done it. Obviously, we haven't started it, but I was wondering if members of the committee wanted to send me some information and I could put something together at this point.
Well, that new
DIL is
information,
supposed to be the next one.
that new information from Gecko is certainly going to make it an interesting minute because we could sort of get a friendly rivalry going and sort of a little bit of an entertainment going on. But that's what I think. Any other comments? So I did mention we're at correspondence, and I have none. Councillor Khan had another commitment tonight, so that's why he's not at this meeting. And lastly, other business. Does anyone have any other business to share? Good. Well, with that, may I have a motion to adjourn? Thank you, sir. Can I have a seconder? Stephen. Very good. All in favor?